Good evening, everyone. Hello, I have checked that I'm not muted, so this should work well. So the general theme is about the MPs resigning at the start of this stream. I better just check on the news feed, but at the start of this stream, in the last 24 hours, or on the last day, 3 Tory MPs have resigned. First of all, it was Mad Nads. Then it was Boris Johnson himself, and now today Nigel Adams. The scuttlebutt is that there are several more who are going to resign, but they're stringing it out to make Rishi Sunak sweat. So rather than doing it, because if they did it all in one go, it's like, and it's probably just going to be half a dozen. Don't think we're going to end up with 20 or something. I'll try and explain why that wouldn't be anyway. But we're not talking about like 20 resigning or anything. We're talking about probably 6 or 7, maybe. And so obviously, if like 6 or 7 did it all at once, I mean that's not good news, because that means Rishi Sunak is faced with 6 or 7 by-elections. But then it also means so are Labour and the Lib Dems, although they'll divvy them up between themselves depending on where they are. But if they did it all in one go, Rishi Sunak would know what was going on. Whereas, so there's 3 so far. So let's say someone resigns tomorrow morning, say. Then let's say no one resigns at all for the rest of tomorrow, and no one resigns on Monday. Then suddenly someone resigns on Tuesday. So even when you've got to your 6 or 7 who are going to resign, if they string it out over a couple of weeks, Sunak will never know if there's anyone else just waiting. So, you know, it'll look quite chaotic. That will inflict maximum damage on him. Now, there was a question earlier on sort of saying, you know, how many more Tory MPs need to immediately quit before Sunak has to call a general election? The answer is, well, probably about 100. I mean, or 50. It's not actually going to happen. We're not going to get to those numbers. Rishi Sunak doesn't have to call a general election. The Conservative Party don't have to have a general election. I mean, you could say the chances of an earlier general election, maybe later this year, are still low, but the chances are higher than they were yesterday morning. But what it can do is increase the chances of the Tories losing the next election very badly. Remember, this is all about one man's vanity. This is all about Boris Johnson's ego. If he cannot lead the Conservatives into the next election, he wants whoever does lead them to do as badly as possible. He wants Rishi Sunak to do as badly as possible so that he can say, you should have stuck with me. It wants it to be disastrous. Ultimately, think about, why did they get rid of Boris Johnson? Because they thought he was going to cost them the next election. Oh, well, how many did you think I would cost you the election by? Maybe about 50 MPs. Oh, well, what if Rishi Sunak loses by 100 MPs or 150 MPs or 200 MPs? That's what Boris Johnson wants. He wants Rishi Sunak to fail so hard that that people have to accept that probably the loss wouldn't have been as bad if they'd just stuck to Boris Johnson. Now, of course, we will never know how bad it would have been, because Boris Johnson keeps making much of the fact that when he was in charge, the Labour's lead was only in single figures. He kept saying it's not actually true. It did go into double figures. It was about 12. But it's not the gap that it is now. You know, Boris Johnson never had a deficit like Rishi Sunak does now. Of course, you could argue a lot of that was Liz Truss. But he will say that. He will say that that Labour's poll lead was smaller under him. Now, remember, a lot of what will have done Rishi Sunak in was Liz Truss's economic escapades, as well as the bad news that was naturally going to be coming anyway. High inflation, for example, particularly energy and food prices. Boris Johnson would have suffered the poll deficit from that. But that's in a parallel universe now, and we can't peer into a parallel universe. Why would other MPs resign? If they resign mid-parliament, they wouldn't get the severance grant that they stay for the next election. So they may not care. They're quite wealthy. But it is an important point. What is the profile of someone who is prepared to quit now? Straight away, anyone who wants to fight their seat in the next election is not going to resign because they won't be able to do that. Ironically, Boris Johnson is the only one who has by resigning still has a chance of fighting the next election. Because if Rishi Sunak doesn't block him, he's going for Henley. He wants to be Henley's candidate. Sunak could block him. Whether he's got the balls to do it is another matter, but he could block him. But anyone else who steps down is stepping down permanently. So straight away, if someone wants to still be an MP after the next election, whether it's because they like their seat on the gravy train, or whether it's because they know that Rishi Sunak is going to have to step down and they want to be part of the group that takes over, there will be Johnson allies who think that even if Johnson can't, that they can still, their group can still take over. There was a comment, actually, just before we went live, I better point in here as well. I reckon this could be a troll rather than anything significant, but you never know. So it was noted that a new party name has been registered with the Electoral Commission, the National Conservatism Party. Now, there have been rumours going around that Boris Johnson might just start his own party. I don't think so. He's too lazy apart from anything else. It might be a bit of a money spinner, but is it going to offset the money he can get for just delivering speeches in America? And remember, if he starts his own party, he's not going to win. He's not going to win seats. At the moment, his marketability, he can command very high fees for delivering speeches in America based on the idea that he's an election-winning machine. All of a sudden, if he can't win an election, that looks a bit suspect. So he's not going to... That's why he won't fight his seat in the by-election. That is why he's resigned now. Because he doesn't want to put himself into a position where he looks like he's running away from fighting his own seat. So he's moaning about, you know, the witch hunt and everything. I am. Let's just see if there are any other comments I should grab really quickly. Love to see how I'm getting excited over one by-election. Now we have 3 encounters. Oh, we've got 4, really. 4. Because there's, is it Rutherglen and Hamilton West or something, the Scottish one? It's got nothing to do with the Conservatives. That's between Labour and the SNP. But that was, I mean, okay, it's not officially confirmed yet because the recall petition has only just sort of gone out. But we are expecting that recall petition to be successful for Margaret Ferrier. So there should, and they should all be on the same day. There's no reason why. Ironically, the one we sort of knew was coming first, the Scottish one, would be the last one to get its writ, because we could have the writ for the other 3 by-elections moved on Monday. You know, we could easily have these by-elections next month. That could be a thing. You would think, because you might think, would Rishi Sunak want to wait? And I'd think no. I think they could be bad, but Rishi Sunak will want them as soon as possible. Because if they wait until after summer, you're getting into party conference season. Oh, very sticky. That could be politically charged. You're also getting to the point where the NHS is starting to look a bit ropier. I think he'll want these by-elections ASAP. How hard would it be for people in the US who want him as a speaker to do a background check? The thing is, though, they don't necessarily... I mean, you know, all they will see is Boris Johnson, this man who keeps winning elections. Like, he went into the mayoral elections 20 years ago, whenever it was, and he wasn't expected to win it. And indeed, he wasn't winning it to begin with until he got Isaac Levidow on his side. I mean, it's not Boris Johnson who's won these elections. It's Isaac Levidow who's won it for him. He hasn't won a single election that Levidow did not mastermind for him. You know, he had the likes of Gutter Harris advising him, and he was losing. Then Levidow came in, completely changed his strategy. Ken Livingstone failed to adapt, and then the rest is history. And again, you know, ultimately, when Boris Johnson has won, so he won twice as Mayor of London, and he won the 2019 general election, it could be argued in each case it was because his Labour opponent did not present an effective strategy against him. So he hasn't really been properly tested. You know, in many ways, And it's a terrible thing to wish for. In many ways, I wish he were still the Prime Minister. I wish the Tories were still sticking with him. Or I wish that they'd got him back instead of Sunak, just so that he could go into that next election, just so that he could have no excuses, just to see what excuses he did come up with. I can imagine him to allow others to start a party for him while he pretends to lead. What, Boris Johnson? Well, again, like people keep saying this, or that he'll join Reform UK, and it's like, it's not in his interest. He's not interested. Even if he doesn't do any work for it, he's not interested in coming third or fourth in an election. It will, right, I want people to remember back. So when Liz Truss fell, right, Boris Johnson, incredibly, had the nominations needed to enter the leadership contest. He would have won. People believe, we can't be certain, but people believe that Tory party members would have picked him over Rishi Sunak, right? Boris Johnson could have been Prime Minister again last October. Why didn't he? Because we are told his advisors said that if you cannot control if you become Prime Minister again and you cannot control your party and you lose the election, that will hit your earnings potential. You will not be commanding the big bucks on the speech circuit. Boris Johnson chose to step back because of the potential to hit his earnings potential. Well, how much more is it going to hit his earnings potential if he's scrabbling around for Reform UK, finishing in third or fourth place? But there we go. Surely an ex-PM's honours list is now so toxic it becomes worthless. Why would you want to be associated with them? Well, people do. They're the same sorts of people at the end of the day. They're all the people who mucked in with him. They're not going to see the honours as toxic. And in truth, most people won't know it's Boris Johnson who gave them those honours anyway. So, it is what it is. I don't think he'd last a second in US politics. I don't know. Who knows? But he's not going to try, so it doesn't really matter. The thought of all these Boris schools given permanent seats in the Lords is too horrifying for words. They're not permanent because the House of Lords isn't permanent. Remember, Keir Starmer wants to abolish it. So they've got a limited time. And the thing is, the more trouble they cause in the House of Lords, the quicker Starmer will want them gone. All it does is it just gives Labour more resolve to get rid of it. And it makes it harder for anyone to argue that the Lords should just be reformed instead of abolished. It's going. What value to public service has Mogg achieved to deserve a knighthood apart from doing his impression of Lord Snoop from the Beano? Well, quite. This is what I would like to say to someone who thought it was a good thing. I haven't bothered asking anyone on Twitter because they won't respond to you. That's what I would say. What has he actually done? Oh, he helped deliver Brexit. Okay, what did he deliver then? What did he deliver? Oh, well, he tried, so he didn't do anything then. Oh, yeah, he brought in this bill. Yeah, the bill's not going through in its current form or its previous form. He hasn't delivered anything. It's all right saying he helped deliver Brexit. He didn't even help deliver Brexit, in all honesty, because the thing that he didn't have a major role in the 2016 Brexit referendum campaign. He didn't have a major role in the 2019 general election campaign. So actually, no, he didn't help deliver Brexit. He was in cabinet when we left the EU. That was it. In terms of delivering any post-Brexit benefits, he didn't do anything. Liz Truss has done more in getting some trade deals, even though they're all crap. But she's at least done something. He's done nothing. Not a thing. He was put in charge of identifying Brexit benefits. Came up with nothing. Oh, we could have crowd symbols on pints. Yeah, we could before. But we still don't have them. You know, when I went on holiday at Easter, I was there in a pub having a look. I could see the UKCA mark, so it was definitely a post-Brexit glass. There was no crown symbol on it. So he didn't even deliver that, did he? So he has delivered zero value. It's not just like... I could look at anyone who's given a knighthood for political purposes by a Tory and say, well, I don't think they should deserve one. That's just, that's just partisan politics. But Jacob Rees-Mogg objectively has not done anything for it. nor has Andrea Jenkins. None of these people have done anything. I've forgotten the full list of people getting them as well. Could Johnson run for US president since he was born in New York? In theory, but he'd have to move to America, wouldn't he? He wouldn't, though, would he? He wouldn't like American politics. Boris gone, Mad Nad's gone, Sneaky Sunak looks weaker than ever. What next for Labour? What's next for Labour is to just keep moving to making sure they've got their manifesto ready to go if there were a snap election. Again, I would say the chances are low still, but they're not as low as they were yesterday. So just wait and see. But ultimately, what's happening here, as I say, Boris Johnson. None of these actions are helping Boris Johnson achieve anything. None of them are even really bringing Rishi Sunak down. This is all about causing the maximum damage to their own party. And what I don't get is why you've got Tory MP. The majority of Tory MPs presumably want their party to do well in the next election. And if they think they can't win, they at least want to limit the damage. Apart from anything else, their seats may depend on it. And yet they're all standing by. They know that this is very damaging. I saw a correspondent, I'm trying to think who it was now. I can't remember who it was. The name may come to me. And they quoted a Tory MP. Obviously, these are all anonymous. They quoted a Tory MP who was a Boris Johnson supporter, who's someone who wanted Boris Johnson to still be Prime Minister, who wanted him to come back. And yet, there was in an expletive-ridden message to this correspondent, whose name I've forgotten now, was basically describing Boris Johnson and the ones who've resigned as expletives, and said, as far as he's concerned, he was a big supporter of Boris Johnson. As far as he's concerned, he's dead to him now. So there are MPs who are looking at this behaviour and are raging, but they're not doing anything. And they're in the majority. They're in the massive majority. Out of what? Around about 360-ish Tory MPs. I can't remember the exact number, 350 something. Out of all those MPs, there's maybe 30 of them at most who are bent on self-destruction. And that's at most. It's probably just like 10. The vast majority of them want the party to unite. Even if they don't think Rishi Sunak's their best bet, they know he's their only bet and they want the party to unite. They could make a stand. They could tell these people to sit down, shut up, and they're not doing. We've had no end of Boris Johnson. Well, we've had some Boris Johnson allies come out and publicly back him and openly criticise Sunak or openly criticise the Privileges Committee. We haven't had a single Rishi Sunak or Rishi Sunak supporter come out and take a stand. It's all right them raging in WhatsApps and text messages to journalists. They're not doing anything. They're all feeble. They're all weak. They deserve to be gone. I mean, Rishi Sunak, I've described him as a weak leader. He's not even a weak leader. He's not a leader at all. You have good leaders and you have bad leaders. And you have strong leaders and you have weak leaders. But all leaders at least try and lead. They may not do it well. They may not be effective, but they try. Rishi Sunak has done nothing. Not a thing. He was asked about it and he said, well, this is why I need to deliver on my 5 pledges. No, it's not. Well, your 5 pledges, this is why you need to get some discipline into your party. Can you imagine what would be happening if this was happening in the Labour Party? The Tories and the Tory press would be all over it. Oh, the Labour Party's disappearing up its own arsehole would be the headlines. Why is Sunak being silent? Because he's not a leader. It's not just that he's weak. He's not actually a leader. He's just someone who wants to steal from the Treasury. I don't know why he wanted to be Prime Minister. He has absolutely no instincts towards leadership at all. I've never seen the like of it. Never. I've seen bad leaders. I've seen weak leaders. I have never seen anything like Rishi Sunak in a leadership role. Because he's not a leader at all. He's not even attempting to be a leader. Because even weak leaders attempt to lead. They They're just like the ones go, excuse me, can you just do what I say? Hello, can you stop talking while I do? You know, that sort of thing. He's not doing that even. He's not even trying to say something. But anyway. I will just say, so there's a lot of comments about the hairdresser getting the MBE. I will just point out that although like we're taking the piss saying he's given his hairdresser, it's technically a parliamentary hairdresser. So obviously to give her the MBE, he must have had some dealings with her. But she wasn't his personal hairdresser or anything. Which, yes, would be embarrassing. But I will also just point out Boris Johnson's mop is only how he presents to the cameras. You know, I remember there was a couple of weeks ago when he was returning from America and a journalist there with a camera crew tried to catch him in the airport. And they did catch him in the airport. And his security was keeping them away. But he came over to them because he wanted to talk to them. And he ruffled up his hair as he approached them. So, you know, his hair's probably perfectly fine most of the time. It's just when he's on camera. He just does that, like, that sort of roguish look for the old dears. If Rishi Sunak is not their best bet for unity, but is their only bet, then doesn't that make Rishi Sunak their best bet? Well, what I mean is, as leader, they might have had better choices for leader, is what I'm saying. It might be that Penny Mordaunt would have been better. It might be that Kemi Badenoch would have been better. We don't know. We have no idea because we cannot see the alternatives in these parallel universes where there was a different result. All I can say is that Rishi Sunak is not... If Rishi Sunak is the best leader that they... See, what I'm saying is also, they can't change the leader now, even if a good one emerged. They can't. It's too late. But if Rishi Sunak really was the best leader that the Parliamentary Conservative Party could come up with, they are buggered for a very long time. A very long time. Here is my Johnson impression one last time. I see. This is the thing. I don't have a Johnson impression. What I have is a voice which I use for the purpose of ridiculing posh numpties. It's not actually intended to be a Boris Johnson voice, which is why people likened it to Anthony Hopkins and George from Rainbow. It's just, I don't do impressions. I'm not an impersonator. I just do silly voices sometimes. That's my silly posh numpty voice. I would have done the same. You know, it's my generic, it's like my generic privately educated Tory voice. But anyway. Sunak has no mandate. He does have a mandate. He has the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto. You do not vote for a Prime Minister. Nobody votes. The only time a Prime Minister is ever voted for is if there is some doubt. You know, the Prime Minister is appointed by the reigning monarch. The reigning monarch will appoint whomever they think has the authority or the confidence of the House of Commons. If they're not sure, then there will be a vote. But if they're fairly sure, then they just appoint someone. So they're not voted. A Prime Minister hasn't been voted for in my lifetime. So, no one's voted. The mandate is the manifesto. It's even though a majority of people voted against the Tory manifesto effectively, it doesn't matter. If you win a majority of the seats in Parliament, you are deemed to have a mandate for your manifesto. So Sunak has a manifesto. He's just choosing not to honour it. Or rather, both he and Johnson chose to honour the bits they wanted, like the draconian and anti-rights legislation. They didn't want to honour all the stuff about levelling up and not raising taxes. Rishi Sunak will make a great supervisor at Pizza Express. They'd send him out to deal with customers who wait an hour for their food. Just the right amount of yes-man energy and lack of principles. But he'd run scared from them. He'd hide behind his pizza box. Sunak has no skin in the game. He's made his money, got his place in history, so has nothing to lose, which is why he's content to coast along. That is possible. I've often thought that myself. That is possible. In which case, he may be perfectly happy to trigger a general election later this year. But I strongly suspect he wants one more budget to make his wife a load more money and maybe daddy-in-law before leaving. Kevin Badnock seems like she may have had some backbone. She was refusing to go through with Moggy's illegal arson. Possibly. We don't know, and we won't know unless she's put in a position later on. My Welsh amusement, it wasn't supposed to be Welsh. Don't really do a Welsh accent. And one of the problem with trying to do a Welsh accent is if you're not very careful, it often ends up turning into more like a Pakistani accent. You know, so I did used to try. See, when I was younger, I used to try and do impersonations very badly. And when I was very young, there was a show. Oh, what was it called now? It was a comedy show. I've forgotten what it was called. It was a sketch show, though. It's the one that introduced Gregor Fisher's Rabsy Nesbitt, but it was part of a sketch show then. And there was one that was like a Welsh diarist, and it would always start so, hello, Shadwell here. And I would try and do that to, you know, and try and mimic like, and big in the 80s was Terry Griffiths in the Snook, and I would try and sort of mimic his voice, but I was never very good at it. Sunak has no mandate because they broke every manifesto pledge at its point. Yeah, that's why. He doesn't have a mandate for a lot of the stuff he's coming out with. Absolutely. The mandate is the manifesto. If you want, just like Liz Truss said, oh, we're going to change it. It's not, no. If you want to change the manifesto, you make a new one and you put it to the people. If you decide, if any government ever decides that its manifesto is no longer what they want to proceed with, you make a new one and you trigger a general election. In the meantime, we all understand, I mean, everyone understands there might be the odd thing in the manifesto that because of changing circumstances you have to amend. Okay, but there needs to be an objective explanation for that, but you'd still aim to deliver as much of your manifesto as you can. The confusion of presidential mandates is a huge part of what's destroying trust in the system. It isn't set up to deal with that type of approach. Quite, yes. This is why it would be way better if we had proportional representation. It would be way more obvious what people are voting for. Watched a video saying proportion of GDP spent on the 90% was something like 3.5%, but that proportion spent on private education for the 10% was about the same, yeah. Yes. I don't think Johnson's finished with Sunak. Oh no, he's certainly not. He wants to destroy him. Basically, there's think Dominic Cummings. As soon as Johnson kicked Cummings out, Cummings has wanted spiteful revenge against Johnson ever since. Johnson is now the same with Sunak, and it's because they're both egomaniacs. I'd imagine Bojo will reveal some juicy revelations involving Sunak, probably involving Partygate. That will be tricky because, in all honesty, Sunak is unlikely to actually be involved in Partygate. I know there's that one time that he was fined for. That was literally him being asked to go down to the Cabinet Office. In all honesty, he probably had no idea what it was about. He was just asked to go to the Cabinet Office. The only thing Sunak really did wrong from a legal point of view was not leave immediately. That's why he was fined. So, but in reality, you can believe that Sunak wasn't probably having parties like that. So I think he's probably fine. The only dodginess he will have got up to over the pandemic was dodgy financial affairs. But anything that comes out there is likely to be implicating Boris Johnson. So, yeah, I don't think Johnson, in all honesty, probably has the goods on Sunak. It's just that Johnson may not care if anything damaging comes out about him, because Johnson may take the view that he's already blighted by Partygate anyway, so anything extra that comes out that implicates him doesn't matter as long as it causes Sunak damage. My Labour voting ex-minor granddad said recently, Major was weak, as was May, but Sunak is a non-entity. Can't repeat what he said about Cameron. Johnson and Truss. I mean, to be fair to Major, he did at least bang his fist on the table and call the ERG a bunch of bastards, which was rather more backbone than any of the ones since have shown. But yeah, I mean, you could argue that in those, what did for the Conservatives in the late 90s, apart from the fact I think Labour did actually run a good campaign in 97, but what did for the, where the Conservatives went wrong is they, instead of, whenever any minister disgraced themselves, instead of Major disciplining and like punishing them, he tried to stand by them, whether out of loyalty or whatever. That was a mistake, because that then allowed Tory sleaze to sort of form an avalanche, really. He should have dealt with it all, and he didn't. But compared with the ones we've had recently, is like a shining beacon. And also, John Major, when it was his time to go, what did he do? When he lost, he just left Downing Street and went and watched the cricket. If only Boris Johnson had had the good grace to do that. I said he wouldn't have gone to watch the cricket. He'd just gone dogging with someone, wouldn't he? But, you know, if only he'd just left and that's it, gone. Should be an entrance exam for being an MP. Narcissism shouldn't be enough. The problem then is you'd stack it more in favour of people with a privately funded education, wouldn't you? Or they've got the money to be coached for whatever the entrance exam is. No, we have to work on the principle that beyond a few qualifiers that anyone can stand to be an MP. Anyway. Oh no, I've got another Harry Potter reference. You said that the Tories are guilty of great cowardice, so none of them are Gryffindors then. Yes. No, I think if well, I'm sure Conservatives have read the Harry Potter books. I'm quite sure they all identified with Slytherin and wondered why everyone was having a pop at them, in all honesty. Because their aim is power. Sunak's probably more worried about messages coming out showing he was against the furlough and fought it. It's his only plus with the public. Possibly, although I think he probably did get on board with that. No, I think they're much more worried about finding out that a lot of the waste he was warned about, and I know he was warned about in Parliament, but what official warnings was he given? He could always dismiss warnings in Parliament as politically motivated. Obviously, he's not going to listen to his political opponents. But if he was told things, like the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, you know, he claimed that it was backed by the science. No, it wasn't. And if it comes out that officially that was not the case, then that will be very damaging. Who do I think has the best chance in mid-Bedfordshire, Labour or the Lib Dems? Lib Dems all day long. It's classic. It's classic like North Shropshire, like Tiverton and Honiton. It's absolutely classic case of, yes, Labour came second in the general election. That is because in a seat like that, it's basically a Conservative area. In a seat like that, Labour grab virtually all of the left-wing votes. So, but most of the votes are right-wing. Now, you may get some clustered around the centre that will vote Labour to get rid of a terrible Conservative government, okay? But most of them will not vote Labour. So Labour have got a ceiling. In places like that, Labour get not quite their potential, but they get their potential is not enough to win. Whereas the Liberal Democrats can win most Conservative votes. Remember, most votes are grouped around the centre anyway. You know, so the Liberal Democrats have got a way higher potential. The reason why the Lib Dems in places like that tend to finish in third is because Labour get all the left-wing votes, the Conservatives get all the right-wing votes, and the Lib Dems just get scraps. So it's a Lib Dems one. Absolutely 100% Lib Dems. And despite the fact that Labour have been saying, oh yeah, we're going to campaign and stuff like that, I bet you they don't. They said all that for North Shropshire. They said all that, you know, for that's what I would say. They said it for North Shropshire, and yet when it came down to it, they put a candidate up, but when it came down to it, they didn't really focus on it. What will happen is, because there'll be 4 by-elections on the same day, right? So let's go through them. Rutherglen and Hamilton West, I think it's called. Again, no one, I don't think anyone's corrected me on that. I think that's what it's called. That'll be between Labour and the SNP. So Labour need to target that, right? Labour are already targeting that, and that's a big one for them. Then you'll have Uxbridge and I get clobbered for this by Southerns all the time. It's spelt Ruislip, but you say Ruislip. Why is there a U in it then? Anyway, whatever. So that's a Labour target, and Labour, it's not an easy one. So Labour are going to have to really focus in on that, right? Then you've got Nigel Adams-Selby. That's also a Labour target. So straight away on that day, 4 by-elections, Labour are going to have to target 3 of them. The Scottish one should be a good Labour win, but they want a big one, right? So they're going to have to go hard at that. The Uxbridge seat is winnable for Labour, but it's not easy. They're probably not going to win it by a large margin, so they have to focus on that. Selby, polling would suggest the Conservatives will hold it, but it is winnable. It's tight. So Labour, if they really go to town on that, they could nick that as well. Why on earth would they waste time on Mid-Bedfordshire when they're never going to win it? And if they try, all they will do is split the vote and let the Tories win. They want to destroy Rishi Sunak's credibility. It's in Labour's interest to destroy Rishi Sunak's reputation. And the way they do that is by making him lose by-elections. If they cannot win them, they need to give a clear run to those who can. So Mid-Bedfordshire is a Lib Dem target. And Labour need to get the hell out of the way. And I actually think they will. I'd have been worried at one time, but given Tiverton and Honiton and North Shropshire, where Labour did not get in their way, they did stand a candidate, I know that, but they didn't get in their way. And the swing needed for Mid-Bedfordshire is smaller than those two as well. So the Lib Dems are well up for it. A bit off topic here. Former Autoglass boss Gary Lubner is set to donate $5 million to Labour, should be worried by large donations filled into the party. Yeah, I would always worry about large individual donations, yes. It doesn't necessarily mean there will be anything untowards, but, you know, 5 million is a hell of a lot. Yeah, I would always be very uncomfortable with very large individual donations. How do I think Starr will deal with the war in Europe? Never heard his views on our military. Yes, yeah, his views are that he supports the government's action. So we can assume that we will carry on doing that. No one's really criticised the Conservatives for our military involvement in Ukraine. So Labour will just continue it. If anything changes and we need to adapt, then they can do that. It may well be that it's over by the general election. You know, it might well be. I mean, this is what Rishi Sunak will be hoping for. He will be hoping that at least military victory is achieved, because obviously there's different victories in a war as complicated as this, but that military victory will be declared before the general election. He'll be hoping for that Ukraine boost. But if not, Starmer will just do exactly the same. He's said that. He said he's supported the government every step of the way. So there'll be no difference at all. What do I think of Jacob Rees-Mogg's constituency last time, 50%? How do you vote tactically there? Jerem has to go. I can't remember in his seats, but what I do know is that come the election, we will know. There's a cast iron way to tell. You can't do this for local elections because one, it's hard, and two, you won't find it anyway. But and there will obviously be the tactical voting website fully out then. What I would suggest is for a Westminster seat, it's really easy to know who to vote for. Go Google the betting odds for that seat. Find out who has the shortest odds that's not the Conservative candidate and vote for them. Because the bookies know. There are other ways as well, but that is by far the easiest way. Because bookmakers are in the habit of making money. So they need to know really who has the best chances. So you go for the candidate that's not the Tory MP that has the shortest odds. Would proportional representation prevent populism? It would certainly make it much less likely. SNP won Rutherglen with a 6,000 majority. Yeah. Boris Johnson won Uxbridge and Ruislip with a 7,000 majority. It's different times. It's different times. We don't have Jeremy Corbyn running the Labour Party now. It's all different times. Labour are on... At the moment, polling would suggest that Labour can achieve a 10% swing in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, and they only need a 5% swing. But at the same time, I would suggest... I actually did do a video on this, but Boris Johnson wrecked it. But I forgive him. Because he's going. But Labour will want that 10% swing. Because it's not enough to win these seats for Starmer. He needs to win them with the swing that polling suggests he should get. Because that will then allow him to say, this polling that says I'm going to get a massive majority, yeah, it seems to be pretty accurate, doesn't it? Even though by-elections are very different beasts. Because in by-elections, you only got about half the people voting in them. Turnout tends to be about half of what it is in a general election, which itself is nowhere near the full electorate anyway. Labour has established a clear lead over the Tories in more than 100 battleground seats that will decide the next election according to new analysis. Yeah, I saw that article earlier on. It was actually quite clumsily written. But yeah, I mean, the point I think it's making is what we've known for a while. Polling suggests that Labour could win a big majority, but it is, and Tories often say this, and they're not wrong, it's a soft majority, so they can't afford to be glib. Some people are saying, well, that gives them leeway now to do this or this, and it's no, it gives them leeway to do nothing other than what they are doing. They have to, as unpleasant as some of the things are that needed to win, they have to make sure they carry on doing what they've been doing. Does Johnson want to become leader of the opposition after the election? Why is he standing for Henley in the next election? I don't know that he is. I think it's a bit of a coincidence that he buys a house in or very near Henley, and then a few weeks later, the sitting MP of Henley says he's not standing at the next election. I don't think he wants to be leader of the opposition after the next election, unless, of course, in his head, he can become the Conservative leader and then win the very next election. Maybe even in his head, he'll be so brilliant that he'll bring Starmer's... he might think that Starmer is on for a hung parliament. He'll have a weak minority government. They'll have to go to the polls a year later, and he will come storming in and become Prime Minister again. In the mind of a narcissist, all sorts of things can happen. But the Conservatives will not make him their leader again, and he will not win an election if they did. David saying PR wouldn't prevent populism, but it would be a more representative set of representatives. Yeah, it would. Nothing really prevents it, but it does make it much less likely, because you need an actual majority to support you to get, power. Have I defended what Starmer's done to Jamie Driscoll yet? What do you mean defended? What, you mean refused to allow an anti-Semite to represent Labour? Behave yourself. And I've said that in multiple streams. I really don't know why that's still coming up. Johnson wasn't personally popular in 2019. Corbyn won the election for the Tories. It wasn't just Corbyn, but that was a big thing. There were three factors. There was the Corbyn thing. There was like, get Brexit done. Remember, get Brexit done wasn't just a rallying cry to Brexiteers, but to those who were just sick of it. Because in a lot of people's minds, Brexit was stopping the government from focusing on the issues they cared about. Healthcare, education, stuff like that. They oblivious to the fact that Conservatives don't care about those things anyway. So they just wanted it to stop. And then levelling up was another big thing. Again, Boris Johnson didn't promise to level up just because he thought it'd be a laugh. He did it because that was a necessary part of winning those red wall seats. Remember, Boris Johnson you're right, he wasn't popular. He had no chance of winning a majority by purely targeting traditionally Conservative areas, because a lot of those areas were no fans of Brexit and no fans of Boris Johnson. So the only way he could win was actually by targeting seats that the Conservatives had never really tried to target in the past, because what's the point? You've no chance of winning. And levelling up was absolutely key to that. Do I think voter turnout will be record-breaking considering just how bad things are for people and people want to see change? No, I don't. Again, a by-election, like, even if you've got a lot of people who are desperate to get rid of the Conservatives, they know the by-election is not going to do that. They know all it is a protest vote. All of these seats coming up for by-election they'll be there in the general election next year. They're just voting now, just as making a statement. And next year is the real one. So there'll still be lots of people going, what's the point? Doesn't matter. Doesn't actually change anything in reality. But there will be people who go out there wanting to have their say. Can I see Johnson becoming the new editor of the Daily Telegraph under new ownership? Couldn't rule it out, could you? I could certainly see him returning and doing his columns with the Daily Telegraph. I don't imagine that even if there's a less insane owner, the Telegraph will. It may go back to how it was. It may improve, but it will still be targeted at the same sort of readers. And if those sort of readers want to read what Boris Johnson has to say, then yeah, I can still believe they'll take him on as a columnist. Whether he would agree to be an editor is another matter, because if he wants to keep going off to America to do speeches, that could be different. He may just fancy for £300,000, £400,000 a year writing one column, because he used to, years ago, he used to get $250,000 for writing one piece. I just think, bloody hell. I mean, I write 14 a week. that are of the size, in fact, sometimes larger than a newspaper column. But, I write the equivalent of 14. Obviously, they may not be very good, which is why no newspapers are asking me to write for them. But I write the equivalent of 14 a week. He knocks one out a week, did get $250,000. So with the fact that he's a former prime minister and a bit of inflation, could easily go to 400,000 a year, couldn't it? Not $250,000 a week, sorry, $250,000 a year for one article a week. How many more by-elections do I think we'll need before the next general election? Again, there is no number. The general election will happen when the Tories want it to happen, unless there's going to be 50 by-elections and the Tories lose them all. It doesn't really matter how many. All these by-elections do, they don't hasten the general election, or they don't have to. Whether it plays on Tory MPs' minds is another matter. Whether it causes them to sort of doubt themselves and bring it forward, that's up to them. What it does is it makes Sunak less likely to do well in the general election, because he will just be getting failure after failure after failure. How is Driscoll an anti-Semite? Holocaust denier. It's not Starmer's tactic. He's a known Holocaust denier. I'm really not going to keep going on about these. Every time, Labour blocks someone for standing for the Labour Party, it is 100% of the time. Whenever I look into it, it is 100% of the time because they are not Labour supporters. They're either only in it for their own. They either openly attack the Labour Party, or they are anti-Semites, or there's something else which is voter repellent. Doesn't a democracy mean that everyone should be allowed to stand? Let the people make up their minds. They can stand. No one's saying Driscoll can't stand. Of course he can stand. He just can't stand as a Labour candidate. That's not undemocratic. That is saying if you don't stick to the rules of the party, you can stand as an independent. He might win. Nothing wrong with that. And this idea that people are entitled. I can't go to my local Labour Party and demand to be the Labour candidate. There are other people wanting to do it. You choose the one who's best. And the one who's best is the one who's not an anti-Semite. Because allowing an anti-Semite to stand for your party, when particularly anti-Semitism, what that has done to the Labour Party in the last few years, that affects the whole country. It doesn't just affect his election, it affects Labour's chances across the country. And then we let in a Conservative government. I'll tell you something. I'm going to get on my high horse here. I'll tell you something. What did it mean to me in 2017 when Labour lost the election? It meant more people going into poverty that didn't need to. It meant more people dying that didn't need to. It meant more people being harassed for whatever, their sexuality or their race or their religion, that didn't need to, right? What did it mean in 2019? The same thing. More people dying that didn't need to. More people being plunged into poverty that didn't need to. That is the cost of losing for Labour. And anyone who says, oh yeah, but I don't mind the Tories winning as long as I can have some Labour candidates that say some things that I like and I'll ignore their casual racism. No, I'm not having that. I'm not having it. People are dying. People are being plunged into poverty. And all for what? I've been attacking all this video, the Conservatives doing nothing, about the raging vanity of Boris Johnson. Well, what about the raging vanity of a multi-millionaire who on his birthday gets his wife and his close friends to ask people in poverty, struggling with a cost of living crisis that he left them with, for money that they can't afford so he can pay for expensive lawyers? You know, I'm absolutely sick of the whole Corbyn crowd at this point. You know, I was a Corbyn supporter way back when, like a lot of people who are turning on to politics will be, because we approved of his anti-poverty stance. But the more it's gone on, the more this person is no different to Boris Johnson. He just doesn't have such a posh accent. But the sense of entitlement of him and his crew, that there's nothing, there's not a fag paper between Johnson and his allies and Corbyn and his. They're the same, exactly the same. But there we go. Would I write for a newspaper if asked and the money was good? Oh yeah, why not? Why not? I would absolutely do that, as long as I was allowed to write what I'd like. I mean, obviously I understand when you write for a paper, there's an editorial process. They do sort of go, you know, they're not going to just let you do what you want and they will publish every word. There'll sometimes be a back and forth. I get that. But as long as I am happy with the end result, then I would be more than happy to do that. I mean, I was asked when I was last on Max and Alex's Sunday Roast show, we were all asked if we would go on like GB News, and I would say, yeah, I would go on GB News. I'm actually less sure now, though, I have to say, because I've forgotten the fella's name, the Freeview Jesus guy. He's been promoting anti-Semitism of late, so I would be thinking, and given that they haven't done anything about that, I would think, hang on a minute, there are maybe some limits. Maybe I wouldn't now. But ordinarily, what I'd be saying is I wouldn't not go onto a platform just because it's politically opposed to me, because as far as I'm concerned, it's allowing me to present my political views and my perspective to ones who wouldn't naturally share it. There's no value in I mean, I am aware that, you know, my channel is going to be largely, like any social media platform, it's largely an echo chamber. I know that the majority of people are going to approve of what I say. If I have a quick look here, I can see, I mean, the percentage of likes to dislikes I got my video, 99.4%, 99.6%, 99.3%. You know, it's 99 point something percent every time, right? And the only time that ever happens is if I do a video talking about the SNP when it goes down to like 98 point something. So I know it's a bit of an echo chamber, but it doesn't mean to say I have to be comfortable within that. You know, I'm quite happy to go out and present my views to, you know, I don't necessarily seek out a hostile audience, but an audience that isn't going to believe me, for which I have to make the strength of my argument, you know, my aim. But there it is. Is anti-Semitism in the UK the same as criticising the Israeli government? No, that's what they say, you see. That is what they say. They say, oh no, they're having a go for criticising Israel. No, they're not. No, they're not. We all know that Israel are effectively behaving, you know, like those who persecuted them a few decades earlier. But here's the thing. Holocaust denial has got nothing to do with Israel, because the Holocaust happened before the formation of the State of Israel. So that one doesn't even work. No, it's not. Everyone understands you can criticise Israel for apartheid and treating Palestinians, whether inside Israel or outside Israel, or the illegal occupation of parts of what they have now called Israel but is not. All of that is fine. That's reasonable criticism. That is not what these people do. They retreat to it when they get called out. It's just, it's a smokescreen. I should do a couple of stints with James O'Brien. Yeah, he hasn't asked me. Thanks for the rant, enlightening. I do. Okay, there are some things that do genuinely get me up, and as I say, like, for me, like this is what I say about the difference between the Conservatives and Labour, and this is why it baffles me that the Conservatives really hate losing elections, but Labour seem okay with it. It's like, what happens when the Conservatives lose an election? What happens to them? They lose a few tax breaks. What's going to happen to the multimillionaires when Labour come in? They'll lose a few tax breaks. A few tax avoidance schemes may be shut down. That's it. Are Labour going to take all their money? No. No. They're just going to make them pay their taxes properly. They're not going to raise the rate of income tax in all likelihood. They'll keep it the same. They'll just say, but you don't get your tax breaks. That's all they're going to do. That's all the Conservatives lose. A few tax breaks. If they're making money, if they're good at making money from investments or their own business, Labour don't harm that. They just say, but pay your taxes. That's it. And your workers will be happier, and your workers will be better educated, and your workers will be healthier as well. Right? But what do Labour lose when they lose? What do they lose? People die. People go without health care, so they become ill. And the longer you go without health care, the less likely you are to make a full recovery. So having a Conservative government leaves people with lifelong health problems because they're not treated early enough. You know, people are plunged into poverty. There are people who can go from, you know, having a reasonable standard of living. They can have a car, they can have a reasonable house or home. They can afford to go out, they can afford to go on holiday. And all of that can end. For some people, that will end when the Conservatives come in. Not for everyone, but for some people that will end. And they'll be finding themselves, first of all, having to turn the heating off in winter. Having to go to cheaper shops for their food, and then not eating every day so your kids can eat. And then not even that, so your kid faints at school first day back after a holiday because they're not having enough food, or you've got to go to the food bank. That is the cost of Labour losing, and I have absolutely no time for anyone who even risks it deliberately. I say deliberately because in 2010, when Gordon Brown stepped down, I will admit I backed Ed Miliband. And I knew at the time, I was perfectly well aware that David Miliband was probably the better campaigner. And I thought to myself, but I think I would prefer Ed Miliband to be Prime Minister. And I believed that both of them could win, even though I knew that David Miliband was more likely to win. And as soon as we lost in 2015, I felt sick. I felt sick because we lost. And I thought we might not have lost with David Miliband. And I might not have liked David Miliband as much. But David Cameron now had a majority. And I absolutely felt sick at the people who were going to die. And I felt very responsible for that. Even though my one vote wasn't going to swing it. And so from then, I have resolved that I will never, ever do that again. You know, you cannot take an election for granted. Food banks and rations, you can't just go to them daily. No, but you get more than a day's worth of food in them. What I am saying is that people will have to go to food banks that didn't used to have to when you go from a Labour to a Conservative government. Or just when you go from a Conservative to a worse Conservative government. Ed Miliband's been amazing in Parliament lately. He is amazing. He is superb as a minister, just not a great leader. Not a great campaigner. And he's probably learnt as well because he's got quite a lot of humility. He's not someone who's up his own arse. He didn't, like, when he failed and he stepped aside, he didn't say, oh, it's so unfair. He didn't complain. He didn't moan about the press. He took responsibility. He said, sorry. He said, sorry, I failed. You know, and that's the first time that had happened for me. So, and that sort of attitude is what you need if you want to get better. You can't have the attitude that you're brilliant. If you have the attitude that you're brilliant, what is your motivation to learn to be better? You know, so you need people who recognise that they've got limits. That is why he's now better than he was. But I would still say he's probably not someone you'd want to lead the party because his campaigning skills are not necessarily better. He's just a very good debater in Parliament, but he always was. But I would argue he is better now. Anyway, right, last few. Disappointed Labour will delay the Green Plan. This put clear water between them and the Tories, and due to the delay, they won't be able to show the benefits before they try to win a second term. Well, we don't know that. I mean, what Labour are essentially doing is making sure the Tory press cannot say these spending plans do not add up. I was disappointed as well, I have to say. It was one for me of the marquee pledges. But at the same time, Labour, I understand the need for Labour to make sure that nobody can say their spending plans don't add up. And the other thing to remember is this. Just because they are still promising to do it, by the way, they're just not promising it will be that 28 billion straight away. It doesn't mean to say it won't be. They're just not guaranteeing it. There's quite a few things that Labour are not guaranteeing, but we may still get anyway. So we'll just leave it as it is there. Are we coming back with the slither claw thing again? The slither claw doesn't exist. But anyway. People have short memories. They criticise Starmer but failed to see the incredible task he's done with Labour since he took over. After 2019, I lost all hope. I thought 15 years of Tories. Certainly, with the number of MPs Labour have now, it should not really be possible to win. And it's not just that the Tories are melted down. They've melted down under pressure. You know, they've collapsed under pressure. The Tories that we've got now, they were at each other's throats in 2018 and 2019, but they still won. They just changed the leader and went on to win. And now it's not working, and it's not working because they're under pressure, because the public are now looking at Labour and going, yeah, they're not. I'm not saying they're fired up by a Labour government, but they're now at least looking at Labour and going, they'll do. And when the Conservative government won't do, they'll do is good enough. But anyway, we will have to call it there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for coming on, everyone. It's very hot in here as well. It's been a bit warm today. But thanks for coming on. Have a very good evening, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you later.